Hey friends, today we are diving into one of the most popular UI libraries, ShadCN. You'll learn everything you need to know about this library, and after that we'll design this beautiful responsive dashboard from scratch. But this is not just another copy-paste components tutorial. You'll learn what makes ShadCN special, why it's not a typical component library, what is Radix UI, and how it powers ShadCN, how to integrate Tanstack table, how flexible and customizable it can be, how to use forms and validate inputs, how to implement dark mode, and a lot more. So if you are ready, let's get started. ShadCN is not your typical component library. It doesn't come packed with everything styled and ready out of the box like MUI or Chakra. Instead, it takes a different approach. And that's where Radix UI comes in. Radix UI is a component library for building accessible and unstyled UI primitives in React. It gives you the logic and accessibility stuff already handled, like keyboard support, area attributes, focus management, but it doesn't force styles on you. It's up to you to design how the components look. You can think of it like getting a fully functional Dropdown component with all the accessibility features, but it's naked. You have to give the style. And this is where ShadCN comes in and says, hey, I'll take all these awesome Radix UI primitives and give them a beautiful, themable, Tailwind based skin. So when you use a component from ShadCN, under the hood, it's powered by Radix UI for accessibility and behavior. Styled using Tailwind CSS for full control and consistency. And fully composable, because ShadCN encourages you to own your components. After this information, let's open up the documentation and install ShadCN. You'll notice ShadCN works with different frameworks. For this tutorial, we'll be using Next.js, but it really doesn't matter because we'll be focusing on the design part. We'll be using the latest version of Tailwind, which is version 4, and this is how we can install ShadCN. If you are using npm, use npx ShadCN and the init command, but I recently switched from npm to pnpm, and honestly it feels way faster. It provides the storage efficiency, and also, as you know, after React 19, npm sometimes needs the force flag for some of the libraries. But if you are using pnpm, you don't need to do that. But anyway, just use any package manager you want. So I'm gonna copy here and paste in my terminal. I'll enter. And after running this command, you'll get a prompt to choose a color palette. You can go with any of them. If you open the colors page here, you can see the base colors. Let's choose this one, but don't worry, you can always change it later if you want. After doing that, you'll see that our global CSS file has been modified. And all the colors are right here. It also added here a library and this file, but we are gonna talk about this later when we add our first component. Let's head back to the documentation and install our first component. As you'll notice, we are not installing the entire ShadCN library at once. Instead, we only add the components when we actually need them. And this is pretty different from how most UI libraries work. Of course, you can install everything, but that will bring in a bunch of components you probably won't even use. So let's install our components one by one, just like that. I'm gonna copy. I'll go ahead and paste it into my terminal. And now we have the components folder here. And inside we have the UI folder. And inside this folder, we can see our button component. And right now we can use our button component anywhere in our application. And if you already have some components, don't worry, they will not be deleted. Let's try actually. I'm gonna delete this. Inside the source folder, I'm gonna create my components folder. And let's say test component. And if I install my button again, as you can see, it's still here. It just added this UI folder and the button. Okay, we can remove this and continue. Now I can use my button component in our home page. Let's add it here. I'm gonna import. That comes from components, UI, and the button component. Of course, it takes a children. Let's say click me. And awesome. Let's center this. The height will be full screen, flexbox, item center, justify center. Okay, awesome. I'm gonna zoom in. When I hover over, you can see the default behavior. And if I add disabled, for example, it changes the opacity, and you can see all its base style here. I'm gonna close this menu. This is the base style. There are also some variants here, like variant, size, and by default, the button size is default, this one, and the variant is default. So it uses this primary color. And if I scroll down, you'll notice our button component uses this variant and size as props. So we can use them here. I'll say variant. As you can see, these are our options. If I choose this one, the button color will be red. Let's make this bigger. I'll say size. You can see the options thanks to TypeScript. I can choose the LG. And right now our button is larger. And if you want to add more style, you can always use the class name and add here your own style like rounded full. And right now, our button is gonna keep all this base style, but override this border radius. We can also add our own variants. Let's say X large is gonna be 12, for example, 8, and here is gonna be, let's say 6. Let's use it. I'm gonna come here. Let's see our options, and it's here. Awesome. I can also add an icon inside my button. ShadCN uses an open source icon library called Lucid. Let's see the icons. You can choose any of them. Let's choose this one. I'll select JSX because we are going to use it as a component. Just like that. Let's import. As you can see, this library is already installed. And we can see our icon here. And it's awesome because you don't have to deal with the sizing, spacing, everything is ready to use. Since this icon is an SVG, I can change my style here. If the button has an SVG, padding will be, let's say, bigger. This is how flexible ShadCN can be. But what about theming? I will close here. And I'm gonna open the theming page. You can change the colors using utility classes. Just like here, you can give a different color, but the recommended way is using CSS variables to keep the consistency. If you remember, our color palette is inside the global CSS. These are for the light mode, these are for the dark mode, and you can change them as you wish. As you'll notice, Tailwind uses OKLCH instead of a hex code or RGB color or HSL. It basically provides more control on the lightness and the contrast. There is actually a great article about this. Let me copy and paste. If you want to learn more about this new notation, you can find the link in the description. It's a really long article, but it's great to understand the colors. Okay, anyway, let's move this here and change this primary color. Let's add some random numbers for the test purpose. And I'll change the variant here. It's gonna be default, so I'm gonna delete that. And right now, the color is green. But what if we don't want to touch any of them, but add a new color? So I'm gonna take this back. I'm gonna scroll down and add my color here. Let's say custom color. I'll add exactly the same color. It was this one, I think. And if you are using dark mode, you should also add the dark mode version of this color. It can stay like that, it's just a test. But I cannot directly use this on my button component. If I say text and custom, as you can see, Tailwind is not gonna autocomplete your color. To prevent this, we should define our custom color inside our Tailwind theme. So I will come here. I have to provide its type, which is a color, and my variable name, which is custom color. Let's choose our variable, just like that. And right now, let's try again. I will say custom and it's here. I'm gonna save. And now we can use our custom color. This is how you can easily customize your theme. Another thing you might wonder is CN. So what is this CN inside the utils file? It's short for class and names. It's basically a utility function used to combine Tailwind class names conditionally. But we can already use conditional class names. Why do we need it? Well, it makes our class logic cleaner and more readable. Let me give an example. I'm gonna close this menu, and let's say we have a custom button. We have two props, disabled and is rounded. And inside this class name, I can write my first condition. To do that, of course, we need to use here a backtick, because we are actually using a JavaScript here. And I have to use a $, and I can say if it's disabled, background, let's say gray. If not, let's say blue. And here I need another condition. This time I'm gonna be using is rounded. And if it's rounded, I'm gonna change the radius. And as you realize, it's really hard to read this class name. Of course, you can use this version, but the better way is using CN. Let me comment this out, create a new button. I'll say class name, and this time I'm gonna call my CN function. That comes from library and utils. And now I can write my base style like text small. And after that, I'm gonna use a comma and write my condition directly. I'll say if it's disabled, background will be gray. If not, it's gonna be blue. And if you have another condition, just add one more comma, is rounded, and the border radius will be full. And you can write all your class names just like that. And right now, our class name is cleaner and readable. We don't need to use backticks, we don't need to use template literals. And it's really useful, especially if you have more than one condition. So right now, you know all the basics of ShadCN. That means we can design something bigger, like a real website. So let's use the other ShadCN components and create a dashboard. So I'm gonna zoom out and delete this button. And let's decide what are we gonna create. On our dashboard, we are gonna have two main sections. On the left side, we'll have a sidebar menu, and on the right side, we'll have a navbar and the content. And this navbar and the sidebar will be common components. That means they will always stay on the screen, even if we change the page here. Like users, user ID, posts, or whatever it might be. So let's create our common components. Inside the components folder, I'll say navbar, and app sidebar. And since they are common components, we should use them in the layout. These children will be the content. As I said, on the left side, we are going to have the sidebar. And on the right side, we are going to have the navbar and the children. So we can wrap them with a container. Let's actually say a main tag. And inside, the navbar and the children. I also want to wrap these children because I want to give a padding for my content. And it's gonna be px4. I can come here and say with full. Okay, this is our main layout. Right now, if I visit different pages, they'll always stay here. Of course, when we use ShadCN sidebar, our items will be horizontal, but for now, we can give a flex for the body, and let's take care of the navbar. I'll close my menu, change my HTML tag, it's gonna be navbar, and inside the navbar, we are gonna have two sections. On the left side, we'll have a button that we can collapse this sidebar. For now, let's just say collapse button, and on the right side, we'll have a link that comes from Next.js link. It's gonna be the dashboard and the homepage. And next to this link, we'll have a button that we can change the theme. But for now, let's use the moon icon. Of course, here is the left side. And on the right side, we are gonna have a wrapper. Just like that. And finally, we'll have a user avatar. Before installing our ShadCN component, let's make this flexbox. I'm gonna give a padding, item center, and I'm gonna separate my items using justify between. And I can do the same thing for this wrapper. Flex, item center, and the gap between each item will be 4. Okay. Right now we can add our avatar component. I'm gonna scroll down and find the avatar component. And as you can see, the image is here. But there is something important here. If I refresh the page, as you'll notice, before loading the image, it shows some letters. And that's called avatar fallback. Let's refresh again. Of course, it was too fast, but we can see the letters. Basically, while the image is loading, instead of showing here an empty space, we'll show the first letter of this user. Let's install. I'll open my terminal, install my component, and this is how we can use it. The avatar wrapper, the actual image and its source, and the fallback. Let's use it. I'm gonna import from UI avatar. Just like that. I can change this image. Okay, awesome. And now we can add here a drop-down menu. When I click the avatar, it's gonna show the options like profile, settings, and maybe a logout button. So let's open up the drop-down component here. Here. This is the example. I'm gonna click, and as you can see, menu content is here. And the best thing is to close the menu, you don't have to click here. After opening your menu, just click anywhere outside the menu content and it will close it. Okay, awesome. Let's import. And let's see how it works. Firstly, we need to wrap all the child components with this drop-down menu component, and inside we'll have the drop-down menu trigger. Basically, when we click the item inside this trigger, it's gonna open the menu. In our example, it's gonna be this avatar. When I click, it's gonna trigger, so we'll be able to show the drop-down menu content. We can add a label, separator, and the menu items. This is the label, this line is separator, and the menu items. Okay. Let's import them. Just like that. I'm gonna copy this, paste it here. And as I said, our trigger item will be avatar, so I'm gonna cut this and paste inside this trigger component. Okay, right now when I click on my avatar, I can see the menu. Let's change the items. I'm gonna add some icons and the texts. It's gonna be user icon from Lucid React, and let's say profile. For this one, I'm gonna be using settings and the text. And finally, the logout icon and the logout text. Okay, I can delete this one. I'll save, and they are here. For the icons, I'm gonna give a class name. They are gonna be smaller. And margin right will be 2. So I'm gonna give more space. Let's do the same thing for the others. So let's open our component and see what's inside. I'm gonna scroll down, and as you can see, for the menu content, we have a prop here. Site offset, by default, it's 4. Let's change it. Content, site offset, let's say 10. And right now, there is more space between the trigger item and our menu. And what else do we have? For the menu item, as you can see, there is a variant, and we can use either default or destructive. For the logout button, we can use destructive. So I'm gonna find the last item, and the variant will be destructive. I'm gonna save, and right now it's red. This is much better. So right now we can do the same thing for the dark mode button. When I click here, it's gonna show my options. But before, I want to explain two concepts you'll come across often when using ShadCN components. I'm gonna come here and create another drop-down menu. Let's import our button from the UI folder and this icon from Lucid React. When you explore ShadCN, you will often see this asChild prop and SR only class name. Let me quickly explain why we need them. Here is our menu. The trigger item is this button, and this button includes an icon. When we see this icon, we can tell it's a menu icon, so we can click and open this menu. But we are so lucky that we can see this icon. But what about disabled people? Visually impaired people often navigate websites using a technology called screen reader. It basically renders text and image content as speech, so they can hear them. But when there is only an icon here, it's not clear to them what this button does. So what we can do here is, we can add a text that will not be visible, but that can be only read by screen readers. If I hover over here, as you can see, it's an item that is not visible, and we cannot see any text here. It only works for the screen readers. You can also use area labels for your HTML tags. Accessibility is so important, so always remember to implement it when needed. Okay, what about this prop? Let me delete it first. I'm gonna save, and as you can see, there's a problem here. If I click, you can see that deleting this prop causes a hydration error because inside a button, we cannot use another button. That means when we create a drop-down menu, by default, it creates a button for this trigger, and we cannot use another button inside a button. But if I use asChild here, it only renders this child instead of the default element. So if we inspect here, you will see that only the child button is rendered. Menu trigger is still the parent, but it doesn't create a wrapper element. Okay, after this information, we can continue our Navbar and implement the dark mode. Let's open the documentation and find the dark mode. Here, I'm gonna choose Next.js, and we need to install a library called Next Themes. It basically creates a theme provider, and we can give our default theme like dark, light, or system. And if we wrap our application with this provider, we can toggle between themes. As you can see, there is an example here. It's a drop-down menu, and if I choose light, it's gonna change the colors. I can change the dark or system. We'll do exactly the same thing. But before, let's install our library and create our provider. I'm gonna copy this code. I'll open my menu, and inside the components, I'll say providers folder and theme provider. I'm gonna paste my code. We are gonna import theme provider from Next Themes, but since we are using exactly the same name here for our component, we are using different name here. Right now, we can wrap our application with this provider. So I will open my layout, and inside this body, I'll call my provider and wrap my items here. Let's import. That comes from components, providers, and theme provider. Let me scroll here. I'm gonna close this menu. And inside, I'm gonna write the props. Just like that. As you can see, it's the dark mode because I used here a default theme. And since I'm using a dark mode on my computer, it uses dark mode. But there is something important here. We need to use this suppress hydration warning because since our component renders on the server side, we won't be able to know what system color the user is using, and it can cause the hydration mismatch. To prevent this, inside HTML, I'm gonna add this so it's not gonna cause any problem. So right now we can create our drop-down menu. When I click, we are gonna show the options. We can actually use exactly the same code here because you already learned how to use drop-down menu. There is nothing different here. Let's see the code first. As you can see, asChild is here because we are using a button. If it's the light mode, the moon icon will be invisible. If it's the dark mode, it's gonna be visible. And the opposite for the sun icon. If it's the dark mode, it's not gonna be visible. And we have here as our only class name. Remember why we are using this. And we have 3 options. When we click on them, we are gonna set our theme. So I'm gonna copy here. I'll actually close everything here, open my Navbar. Instead of this moon icon, I'm gonna paste my code. But before, let's say user menu. And let's say theme menu. And I can paste it here. Let's import this icon. That comes from Lucid React. Let me show you. We don't need this anymore. And let's call our hook. Inside the navbar, I'll say const theme set theme. And we are going to be using use theme hook. And since we are using here a hook and click events, our component should be a client component. So I'm gonna come here and I'll say use client. Okay. Let's see. I'm gonna click. Let's choose the light and perfect. And remember, you can always change your colors. Just open your global CSS. And this is for the light mode. And this is for the dark mode. You can change the colors, you can add your custom color, and you can create your own theme. Okay, awesome. So right now we can take care of the sidebar. I'm gonna close here and this terminal, and let's see how to add ShadCN sidebar. Let's open the ShadCN documentation and find the sidebar component. I'm gonna scroll down. And sidebar is here. As you can see, we can add sidebar items, we can have the header and footer, and using this button, we can collapse our menu. Let's install. Choose your package manager and install sidebar. I'll open my terminal, paste this code and enter. After that, it's gonna install our sidebar colors. If you want to, you can change them in the global CSS, but they can stay. And let's see the structure of the sidebar. As I said, inside the sidebar component, we can add the sidebar header. For the bottom, we can add the footer. And between them, we are gonna have the sidebar content. And we can scroll our items here. We can create different groups, and inside each group, we can create our sidebar items. Let's scroll down. And as you'll notice, we are gonna need this provider, because remember, we can collapse our sidebar using a button here, and it's outside the sidebar. So using the provider, we can create our collapse button. And also, if the sidebar is smaller, it's gonna automatically change the size of the content. Okay. So let's wrap our application. I'll open my layout. After the theme provider, I'll say sidebar provider. Let's import. That comes from components, UI, and sidebar. Just like that. By the way, it's not installed because button is already exist, so we don't need to overwrite. I'll say no. And right now, there is no problem. So I'm gonna open my app sidebar component and create a sidebar using ShadCN. But first, I'm gonna add some items here. we are going to have some menu items. Let me import these icons from Lucid React. The home icon, inbox, and the others. Okay, right now using this array, we can create our menu items. Firstly, I'm gonna call the wrapper, remember, sidebar, that comes from UI sidebar. And inside, I'm gonna create the sidebar header. And after that, remember, we'll have the sidebar content. And finally, sidebar footer. Okay, let's see our example. I'm gonna scroll down. And inside the content, I'm gonna create a group, give a label for this group, and inside the group content, we can create our menu. And for each item inside the items array, we are gonna create a sidebar menu item, and we are gonna add our icon and title using the sidebar menu button. I know it looks complicated, but once you create a couple of projects, you are gonna remember everything. I recommend you do not try to memorize anything. If you need a help, just open the documentation. Okay, let's create. Inside the content, I'll say sidebar group. I'm gonna give a label. Let's say application. And after that, we can create our content. Sidebar group content. And after that, let's create the sidebar menu. I'm gonna get my items array. I'll say map. And for each item, we are gonna return a sidebar menu item. Let me close this terminal so we can see better. And since we are using a map here, we need to pass here a unique key, and it's gonna be item.id. Okay, we don't have any ID. We can use titles. They are unique. And finally, let's create a button. Sidebar menu button. Okay, I'll create a link that comes from Next.js link. And firstly, we are going to add our icon, item.icon. Here is going to be the URL. And finally, a text. Let's say a span, item.title. Okay, let me actually close here and open this here so we can see everything better. Of course, we are going to handle the responsive design, but for now, let's use the white screen. And for the menu button, we can use asChild. Remember, when you do that, it's not going to create a default wrapper. Instead, it's going to directly use this child. So right now, our items will be horizontal. Awesome. It looks pretty nice. If we create more items, let's create a couple more groups for testing. And as you can see, I can scroll. This is how it works. So let's take it back and create our header and footer. I'm gonna delete all these items. And inside the header, again, I'm gonna create a sidebar menu. Sidebar menu item. And a button. Again, I will use asChild. And let's create a link. And this is gonna be the home page. Because I want to add here my logo. Let's give the source logo.svg. We are going to give a description, let's say logo, width and height. And let's create a span and write here the name of the website. By the way, did I import something different? Oh, I didn't import at all. So it's gonna come from next image. Just like that. Okay. Let's see right now. And perfect. And what about footer? I'm gonna move this to the right. So we can see our footer. So I will come back. Inside the footer component, I'm gonna create my sidebar menu. And inside sidebar menu item. And let's create a drop-down menu. Let's quickly remember. I'll search for drop-down. Remember, we have the trigger and the content. And inside the content, we are going to create our menu items. Okay. Let's come back. And I'm going to create a drop-down menu. Remember, it's inside the UI. Don't import Radix UI by mistake. We are always using our UI folder. And let's create our trigger element. And remember, asChild. Otherwise, it's going to create a parent button. And let's create sidebar menu button. Because when we click on this button, it's going to trigger our dropdown. I'm going to be using an icon, user2 from Lucid React. And let's write a username here, John Doe. And for the right side, I'm going to be using another icon, and it's going to be an arrow. Just like that. Let me show you the icons here. I'm going to save. Okay, it's here. Let's separate this button. I'm going to give a class name. Margin left will be auto. Just like that. So right now, when we click here, it's going to trigger our menu, and we will be able to see our options here, somewhere here. So let's create our drop-down menu content after this trigger. Again, if you are confused, if you think there are many items here, don't worry. When you create your own application, you are going to understand everything better. Trust me, it's really easy. So I'll say drop-down menu content. Let's close it like that. And inside, I can create my items. Account, settings, and let's say sign out. Okay, but as you can see, our menu is centered. We can change its position. It should be on the right side. So for the content, I'll say align, and it's going to be end. Just like that. Okay, if you want to, you can use here the avatar. And also we can use here a separator. After the header, I'm going to be using sidebar separator. Just like that. And let's see what else we can use. I'm going to show you how to close and open the sidebar, but for now, let's explore what else we can add. As you'll notice, we can use this collapsible prop. And if I say icon, when we collapse our sidebar, it's just going to show the icons. Let's actually see how the collapse. By the way, we can also use the side. If I say side right, we are going to see our menu here. but I think left is better. And it's the default one, so I'm not gonna write side left. And as you can see, we have a hook here, and using this hook, we can set the open state and we can collapse our sidebar. But before using this hook, let me show you how to use this default button. Remember, in our Navbar, we have the collapse button here. Right now, we can use the real one, and its component name is sidebar trigger. I'm gonna save, and the button is here. If I click, it's collapsed, and since we are using the icon variant for the sidebar, we can see all the icons. If I click, it's back. But what if I close here and refresh the page? As you can see, it's open again. To prevent this, we can keep our state in the browser cookie. Let's scroll up. As you can see, we can store our sidebar state. So if it's closed, it's always gonna remember. So I'm gonna copy this, open my layout, and paste it here. And since we are using await, it should be an async function. And I'm gonna import cookies. That comes from Next headers. And right now I can use it here on my provider. And now if I collapse, refresh the page, as you can see, it's still closed. Okay, awesome. We can also create our custom button. Let's comment this out. And I'm gonna call my button component, let's say custom button. I can use a variant, let's say outline. And remember, we have a hook. So I'll say const use sidebar hook. Again, comes from UI. So we can use toggle sidebar function. So when I click here, it's gonna toggle our sidebar. Just like that. And this is how we can use the sidebar hook. But of course, it doesn't look nice. We can use this one. I'm gonna comment this out. I just wanted to show you how to use the custom buttons. Okay, let's come back. And remember, for the navbar, we are using padding 4. For the header, I will do the same thing for the y-axis. And what else we can do? Let's create one more group, and I want to show how to use group actions. I'm gonna create a new group. Let's give a label. Let's say projects, for example. And after that, I'm gonna create a group action. Let's open the documentation and search for action. I'm gonna scroll down, and as you can see, inside the action, we can pass our icon, and it's gonna show our icon next to this group label. And remember, since we are using just an icon, it's better to use here as our only text. Let's do that. I'm gonna copy. After this group, I'm gonna add, import my group action, and this icon. Let's create a content. Actually, let's leave it empty for now. And as you can see, there is a button here. So basically, it's going to be like a shortcut. When we click here, we can show a form that we can add a new project, or you can navigate to the projects page. I don't know, but it's great to have it. So let's create a menu and some items inside. Menu item and sidebar menu button. And remember, asChild in any case. And we can add here a link. Of course, we don't have any other pages, but for now, let's leave it like that. And inside, I'm gonna add an icon and the text. Projector icon. And see all projects. Let's add one more. And it's gonna be add project. And again, we can use here the plus icon, just like that. And what else? We can add collapsible sidebar groups. So when I click here, it's gonna remove the items. Let's try. I'm gonna create a new group. I can actually duplicate this. Let's say collapsible. I'm gonna remove this action. And let's see how to use it. As you can see, we are gonna wrap our group with this collapsible component, but this doesn't come from our sidebar component. It's an individual component. So I'm gonna search for collapsible here. Let's open. As you can see, we can hide the children. So I'm gonna import. I'll open my terminal and install. And after that, we are gonna wrap our group, create a trigger element, and use our items. So let's copy this, wrap our group. I'll say collapsible. I'll wrap my group just like that. Close this terminal and import my component. UI collapsible. And inside this label, I'll create a trigger and this icon. Let's add here asChild. So it's not gonna create a wrapper. And finally, we are gonna wrap our sidebar group content with this collapsible content. It's here. And awesome. What else we can use? We can use here a badge for this inbox. We can show how many messages do we have. So I'm gonna scroll up. Of course, we are using this items array. So we have to write a condition. So I'll say, if the item.title equals inbox, I'm gonna create here sidebar menu batch. And let's write a number. Just like that. You can add here whatever you want. And finally, let's see how to add nested items. I'll close this search bar. As you can see, we can also use menu actions inside the item. It doesn't have to be next to group label. It can be also the menu item. Let me search for nested. Okay, it's not coming. Okay, it's here. Sidebar menu sub. Using this component, we can create child items. So I will come back. Let's create one more group. I'm gonna copy this. After this collapsible, I'll say nested, paste it here. I can delete this action. Let's say nested items. And this is gonna be the parent. So inside this sidebar menu item, after this button, I'm gonna create sidebar menu sub. I'm gonna import, and I'm gonna create the first item, sidebar menu sub item, and let's create a button, sidebar menu sub button. I'll say asChild. I can create a link. Again, let's say the plus icon and add project. And since we are using this as a child, we don't need to add this menu item. I can delete. And perfect. If you want to, you can add more items. Just like that. Okay, so this is how we use Sidebar. But remember, it's one of the most complex ShadCN components. There are tons of different components, tons of different concepts. So if you want to get more information, check the documentation, but I think you won't even probably need all of them. But anyway, I just wanted to show you. Okay, right now you know how to add sidebar items, groups, nested items, how to combine ShadCN components with another components like this collapsible or drop-down menu, and you know how to collapse sidebar, how to keep the state. So now we are ready to take care of our content. Firstly, I'm gonna create a grid system here, and for the big screens, we are gonna have 2 rows and 3 columns, and for the small screens, we are gonna have only 1 column. Let's create, and you are gonna understand better. I will close everything here, open my home page. We don't need them. Firstly, I'll say grid. For the small screens, we are gonna have just 1 column. After the LG screen, it's gonna be 2. If it's 2x large, it's gonna be 4. And gap between each item will be 4. So I will create a div, actually 6 divs. And I'm gonna give exactly the same background for each item, and it's gonna be primary foreground. Remember, it's inside the global CSS. You can go and check. And for each item, I'm gonna give padding 4, rounded LG, and let's say test for now. Okay, awesome. And I'm gonna change the size of the items. Some of them will be bigger. For example, the first one and the 5th one will be twice bigger than the others. So I will say, if it's LG, column span will be 2. Just like that. Let's see the responsive design. At the beginning, there will be only 1 column. And here it's gonna be 2 columns, but the first and the 5th one will be bigger. And at this point, they will be too small. Maybe again, we can have only 1 column. So let's choose them. And I'll say for the X large, column span will be 1 again. But for the 2x large, it's gonna be 2. Okay, this is our home page. And for each div here, we are gonna be using different ShadCN components. So let's start with the charts. Let's open the charts page. And as you can see, we have many options here. We are gonna use some of them. And let's start with the bar chart. You can choose a single bar chart, vertical one, multiple. You can use any labels. We can also change here the theme. And let's use this one. I'm gonna open the code. Actually, I'm gonna choose the chart component because we have to install this first. Let's scroll down and install. I'll open my terminal, install my component, and inside the components folder, I can create a new component. Let's say app bar chart. I'll create my component. Of course, since it's gonna be an interactive component, it should be a client component. And after that, let's use this data. And we need to use this configuration. And finally, we can use our chart. Firstly, we are going to have a wrapper, which is chart container. We are going to pass our config. And in the class name, we should pass a minimum height. And after that, we are going to be using the bar chart component. We are going to pass here our data, the array. And inside this array, we have two main items, the desktop and the mobile. So we are going to be using two bars. The first one will be desktop and the second one will be mobile. Let's use it. I'm going to copy. And firstly, I'm going to create a title. Let's say H1, total revenue, for example. Of course, it's going to be dynamic, but for now, for the test purpose, let's leave it like that. And import our components. Bar chart from Recharts. We are using this chart library under the hood. And let's import bar again from Recharts. And let's use it here. The first one will be app bar chart. Okay. And awesome. We can see our data, but we cannot interact with our charts. When I hover over, I want to see the numbers. So I will come back, open my component, and actually let's check the documentation. As you can see, we can add a grid component before the bars. I'm gonna add my component and import. Again, comes from Rechart. And as you can see, there are some horizontal lines. I can also show the vertical ones. So I will say vertical true, just like that. But I'm gonna leave it false. You can also add horizontal true, but by default, it's already true. So we don't need to write it like that. So I'm gonna remove. It's gonna be only horizontal. And also I want to see the numbers for the x-axis and the y-axis. Let's open the documentation. Again, using Recharts, we are gonna add the x-axis. I'm gonna copy. And let's add it here. And this data key is this month. So we are going to see all the values on our chart, just like that. As you realize, we are using the short versions of the items here because we are using the tick formatter. Basically, it takes the value and uses here the slice function, and it basically takes the first 3 items of the data value. We can add a tick line. If I say true, we are going to see here a small line, but it doesn't look good. I'm going to remove. And we can do exactly the same thing for the y-axis. Let's import from Recharts. We are not going to add any data key because by default it's going to be the numbers. And we are just comparing numbers. We don't need any formatter. I'm going to save, zoom out, and perfect. We can see the numbers. Let's give a style for this h1 tag so we can separate them. Text will be LG. Font will be medium, and I'm going to give a margin on the bottom. Okay, it's much better. It's that easy, guys. And remember, we have the color in the global CSS. We are using chart 1 and 2. Let's check again. Oh, we define our colors here, but for the consistency, we can use our variables here. So I'll say variable chart 1 and here is going to be chart 2. As you can see, it has changed blue and green. If you want to, you can change it. This also looks nice. Okay, green or purple. I think it can stay like that. And as always, you can add your custom color. You don't have to use them. Okay, this is how we are using charts. What about the interaction? Let's come back. We can use a tooltip. Let's import from UI and again UI. And now when I hover over, I can see the details. Awesome. We can also show here which color is which data. And to do that, we are going to be using a legend. Let's see here. Just like that. Let's import. Let me show the imports. These are from Recharts, and these are from our chart component. Okay, and as you can see, colors are here. So let's add one more chart, and it's going to be for this big item. But this time, we are going to be using a different chart. We can use this one. It looks pretty nice. Let's open the code. Again, we'll have the data and the config. But this time we are going to be using area and area chart. Let's first create our component. Actually, I can copy this. Inside the components, I'm going to create a new file, and it's going to be app area chart. I'm going to paste, change the component name. Let's use it here. This time we can change the colors. Let's say 2 and 1. I'm going to change the title, let's say visitors. Of course, we should also change this data, but it can stay. We are just designing. And this time, I'm gonna delete the bar chart. Instead, I'm gonna be using area chart. That comes from Recharts. Let's fix here. And instead of bars, we are gonna be using area. Let's see. We'll use this area component and pass here our data key. Let's import from Recharts. And the second one. And as you can see, we don't have the linear gradient. To do that, we are going to be using these linear gradients. Let me actually copy and paste, and after I'm going to explain. Okay. We basically define here two linear gradients. The ID of the first one is fill desktop, and the second one is fill mobile. And since we are using exactly the same IDs here, it's gonna fill our area with these linear gradients. Let's see. And awesome. When I hover over, I can see the data. If you want to, you can delete here. Let's try. I don't know. Maybe let's leave it. It's much better. Okay, it's that easy, guys. Just add your data and use your data keys. By the way, we don't need this bar and bar chart. And let's create one more. And after, we are gonna learn different components. Again, I'm gonna copy, but actually we are gonna have more items. Not only desktop and mobile. So I'm just gonna copy here and this chart container and create a new component. And let's say a pie chart. I'm gonna create my component. It's gonna be a client component and paste them here. Let me close this menu, import the container, and let's see how to use it. I'm gonna scroll down. And as you can see, the pie chart is here. This looks pretty nice. We can show here the number. Let's see how to use it. Firstly, I'm gonna add here the chart data and the configuration. Let's import from UI chart. By the way, we don't need to use HSL. We can directly use our variables. Let's use this component here. For this third one, for example. Let's change the title. I'll say browser usage. And remember, we are going to show here the total number. So we have to find the total number of the visitors. In this example, it uses React Memo, but since we are using React 19, we don't have to use memo anymore. I'm just going to get this reduce function. And let's say total visitors. And for each item, we are going to get the visitor number and we are going to add them. After that, we have here the chart container, and as you realize, its size is square. So the width and the height is equal, and the maximum height is 250. Let's do exactly the same thing. And inside this container, we are going to add a pie chart. And again, we are going to show a tooltip. Actually, it's hard to see here. Let's copy first, and after we are going to discuss. Okay, let's import them. Tooltip, tooltip content, and pie. We also have here the label. Okay. So this time we are going to be using the pie component, and the data key will be visitors. And here you can increase or decrease the inner radius. Let's see first. As you can see, if I make this 10, for example, it's going to be much thicker. If I make this 80, it's going to be much thinner. Let's leave it like that. And this label includes our visitor number. Basically, we write here our texts and change their position. If you want to, instead of label, you can use an absolute div. You can center the number and this text. And under this chart, we can add some texts. Let's see the documentation. As you can see, there are some descriptions. Let's add them quickly. It's not that important. I will copy them. After the container, let's create a div and paste them. I'm going to import this icon from Lucid React, and let's separate those items. Firstly, I'm going to give a margin on the top. It's going to be a vertical flexbox. Gap between each item, and the items will be center. Okay, awesome. We can change its color. So I will say text, green, and 500. Okay, this is how easy to use charts. There are many others. You can just check the documentation. Of course, we are not able to use all of them. This also looks nice. But anyway, just visit the chart page, select your chart, and check the code. You are going to add your data and the chart components. Okay, so let's get back to the documentation. I'm going to close my components, and let's see how to create cart lists. Let's open the documentation and scroll down and find the cart component. This is a cart example. As you can see, we have a border radius, and inside the cart we have the header, the content, and the footer. Let's install. I'll open my terminal and install the cart component. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to create a list of carts here. And I want to do the same thing for this div, but we are going to be using different data. So let's create a common component. Inside the components folder, I'll say cart list. I'll create my component, and we are going to get a title as a prop, and we'll use it here. H1 tag and the title. Let's give a style, font medium, and margin bottom. As I said, we are going to have two different lists. Let me just copy and paste my data here. Of course, in a real-world application, we are going to fetch them from the database. But remember, we are just designing. We will have the latest transactions and the popular content. So let's write here a condition, const list, and I'll say if the title is popular content, our list will be popular content list. If not, it's gonna be the latest transactions. Okay, right now we can create our cart list here. Firstly, I'm gonna create a div. It's gonna be a wrapper. Flexbox, we are gonna list them vertically. So I will say flex column, and the gap between each cart will be 2. Okay. Let's create our map here. List.map. For each item inside this array, we are gonna return a cart component. Let's see how to use it. We are gonna have the cart wrapper. Inside the cart header, we can give a title and description. We can have a cart content and a cart footer. But as you know, ShadCN is flexible. You don't have to use all these components. For example, instead of header, you can create something else, or you can remove the footer. So I will come back and create my cart wrapper. That comes from UI cart. Of course, since we are using a map, we need a unique key. And it's going to be item.id. And inside, I'm going to create a wrapper for my image. Its size will be 12. I'll give some border radius. And since it's an image wrapper, I'm going to give a relative positioning. And I will say overflow hidden, because we are using rounded effect. It's not going to overflow. And inside, let me close this sidebar, by the way. I'm gonna create my image component that comes from Next.js image. The source will be item.image. I'm gonna give a description, let's say item.title, and I'm gonna be using fill. This is why I'm using relative positioning. Let's give a class name, and the object will be cover. After that, I'm going to create a cart content. Inside, let's say cart title, item.title, and finally a cart footer. Remember, in our lists, we have some numbers here, count, but instead of writing 1200, we can shortly write 1.2k. To do that, I'll say item.count divided by 1000 and k. Of course, since we are using a remote URL for our images, we are going to have an error. Of course, we are not using them yet. Let's open the home page and use them here and here. So I'll say cart list. The title will be latest transactions. And I will do the same thing here, but this time the title will be popular content. Okay, as you can see, we have an error because we need to add this URL into our Next.js configuration. So let's open our Next config file, and inside this object, I'll create an images object and add my remote URL. If you want to, you can add a protocol. It's going to be only HTTPS connection. The host name will be images.pexels.com. And now we can see the images. Okay, but I want to make them horizontal, not vertical. So I will come back. And for this cart component, I'm going to give a class name. Let's see first our cart component. As you can see, by default, it's flex and flex column. That means it's vertical. But this time I'm going to change this and it's going to be flex row. I'll say item center, justify between. So I'm going to separate my items. And in any case, I'm going to give a gap between them. Just like that. Let's give a padding. Okay, awesome. But this content is too short. Let's give a background and see. Okay, it's actually long, but there's a padding here. So let's say padding 0. Okay, awesome. And we can change this title. Let's remove this. I'll say text small and font will be medium. Okay, we can also add here a badge. Let's see our arrays. As you can see, for latest transactions, the badge is the username. And for the popular content, we have the category. Of course, you can directly use a div, but there's an awesome component for that, and it's here, badge. Let's use this component. I'm gonna copy this code, open my terminal, and install. And after that, we are just gonna use this badge component and give our variant. So after this title, I'm gonna create a badge, import from UI, and here is gonna be item.badge. Okay, as you realize, there is a border here. If you want to, you can change the variant. And if I say secondary, as you can see, we are gonna have a background instead of a border. I think it's much better. There is also a space here for the footer. I'll say class name, padding 0. Okay, right now our content is centered. If you want to start it somewhere here, you can use flex 1 for the content, flex 1, and it's much better. Okay, awesome. So this is our reusable cart list component. If you want to, you can make some changes. You can add different data, but for now, it can stay like that. What else we can create? We can create a to-do list here. We can select our list items. And also we can add here a calendar that we can select any date. And in a real application, you can fetch different to-do lists using that date. So I will come back, close everything, and create my component. Let's say to-do list. And inside, we are going to have the calendar, and we'll have a list. And here is going to be a scrollable area, because if we have more than, let's say, 4 or 5 items, it's going to be overflowing. To prevent this, this area will be scrollable. Let's open the documentation, scroll down, and our component is here, scroll area. As you can see, we can scroll. Let's import. And after, we are just going to create here the scroll area wrapper and inside our items. Let's use it. I'm going to import from UI, class name, and I'll say maximum height 400 pixels. And inside we are going to have our items. For now, let's say test. And let's use it inside our page. Here. I'll close this sidebar. I can also give here margin top, overflow Y auto, and let's see. Okay. Right now for each item, I'm going to create a cart, and inside this cart, we are going to have a checkbox, and next to that checkbox, we are going to have a text. So let's say list item. I'll create a cart, and let's see how to use checkbox. The example is here. Let's install. In this example, we have a checkbox, and also we can add a label. And if we use the same ID for the HTML4, even if we click on this label, it's gonna toggle our checkbox. What I mean by that? I'll create a div, flex, item center, and gap between the checkbox and the text will be 4. Let's create our checkbox. That comes from UI and checkbox. Let's give an ID, for example, item 1. And let's create a label. HTML4 will be exactly the same ID. And the title will be, let's create a random text. Of course, it's too long. Let's remove here. Okay, awesome. So when I click on this text, it's gonna toggle my checkbox. Okay. And also, by default, it can be checked. Just like that. And we can give a padding for the cart. And change this label. Text will be small. And the text color will be muted foreground. So it's gonna be gray. Let's create a couple more items so we can see our scroll. Just like that. Of course, you can create a list here and use a map, but anyway, it can stay. Let's remove them. Some of them can stay. Okay. I can also give a gap between them. So let's create a div here. Flex, flex column, and gap between each cart will be 4. Let's cut this and move it at the end of the last cart. Okay, it's much better. Right now we can add here our calendar. It's here. Right now, instead of this text, we are going to be using this component. We can choose any date. And under the hood, this component uses React Daypicker library. So when we install the ShadCN component, it's going to automatically install this library. And let's see how to use it. As you can see, we are going to need a state here that we can store our date. And we can use our component like this. We are going to pass here the selected date, which is our state. And when we choose a date, we are going to update our state. And the mode is single. That means we can choose only one item here, only one date. But also you can use a range mode, so you can select multiple dates. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to paste it here, but before, let's create here a button, and we can write the current date. And when we click on that button, it's gonna open our calendar component. And since ShadCN is flexible and we can combine our components, we can use something different here. And this component will be Popover. Basically, when I click here, it's gonna show a Popover component, and we can show our calendar here. Let's install. By the way, it didn't install the calendar component yet. It asks if you want to override the button or not. Let's say no. And right now we can install Popover. Okay, let's see how to use it. It's really easy. We are gonna use the wrapper and the trigger. When we click on this item, it's gonna show this content. That's all. So let's copy this. Paste here. I'm gonna import them from the UI components. Just like that. Let's see first. I'm gonna click and it's here. Okay. So right now we can create a use state, const date, set date, use state hook from React, and it's gonna be a new date. And we can write here the type. And since we are using a hook, our component will be a client component. Because it's gonna be interactive, we'll be able to choose our date. And also, I want to create one more state, because when we choose a date, I want to automatically close this popover. So I'll say open, set open, use state, and let's say false. At the beginning, it's gonna be false, so we can use it here. By default, it's gonna be false. And when we trigger, we can set our state here. To do that, we are gonna be using onOpenChange and set open. Let's create here asChild, because remember, we are gonna have here a button. To prevent creating a wrapper button, we are using asChild. And I'm gonna use a calendar icon here. That comes from Lucid React. And after that, I'm gonna write a date. I'll say if date exists, write the date here. And if not, I'm gonna create a span and pick a date. Of course, this should be a string, and I want to show the date, the month, and the year. To do that, we are gonna be using the format method that comes from dateFNS library, and we are gonna pass here our date and the format. It's basically gonna localize your date, and it's gonna write the month name, the day, and the year. And when I click here, as you can see, it's gonna trigger my popover. Let's give a style. I'll say with full. Awesome. We can also add here a title, because all our items here have a title. So I'll say h1 tag, to-do list, text alg, font medium, and margin bottom, as we always do. Okay. So let's add our calendar inside the content. So instead of this text, I'm gonna be using my calendar component. Let's get back and remember again. I'm gonna copy this, paste it here, and import from UI. There's a warning here because it can be undefined also. But I want to add one more thing here, and it's gonna be set open, because when we select, we are gonna close our popover. So I'll say date, set date, and set open, and it's gonna be false. I'm gonna choose and it's gone. Awesome. We can change our style. I'm gonna delete the padding here for the content. Let's also delete this border. I'll say padding 0 with auto. And awesome. As you realize, if there is no enough space here, it shows on the top. This is another great feature. Okay, we use tons of different components. Of course, there are more. So let's create one more page and use different components. So let's create a users page and a single user page. To do that, we are going to be using Next.js app router. And inside, I'll say users page.tsx. It's going to be users page. Just like that. And I want to do the same thing for the single user page. Basically, when we write here any username, it's going to open the user page. And since this username is dynamic, we are going to use it like that. Single user page. I'm going to refresh and perfect. If you want to, let's first take care of the single user page, because for the users page, we are going to be using a data table, and it's going to be a little bit complicated. Firstly, I want to add here a BreadCrumb, so we can navigate between pages. To do that, I'm going to open the BreadCrumb component. It shows the links, and there is small icons between them. Let's install. I'll open my terminal and install. And after that, we are going to create a list. The first item, between them, we are going to have the icon, which is the separator, second item, and the third item. Let's use it. I'm going to import them. I'll say the dashboard, which is the home page, the users page, and the user, let's say John Doe. Of course, it should be dynamic, but we are just designing. If you want to, you can create your own custom component, and you can take the first item using Next.js navigation and use it here, and this part, and show it here. But anyway, we are just designing. And after that, I'm going to create a container. And basically, in this container, we are going to have two main sections. On the left side, we'll have the user information and maybe some list here. And on the right side, we are going to have a chart and the user card. So basically, for the big screen, we are going to have a horizontal container, but for the small screens, it should be vertical. Firstly, let's say margin top. So we are going to separate our div. And I'll say flex. At the beginning, it's going to be vertical, but if it's X large, the flex will be row. And gap between each item will be 8. So let's say left and right. At the beginning, they are going to be width full, but if they are X large, for the first item, the width will be 1 unit, and this is going to be 2 units. So it's going to be twice bigger than the first one. And also, when we create items on the left and right, I want to give space between my items. So I'll say space Y 6. Okay. On the left side, firstly, I want to create a div that shows the user badges. So I'll say div. I'm going to give my foreground background. I'll give some padding, and rounded will be LG. Just like that. Let's create one more container. And it's going to be information container. And one more. And it's going to be the cart list. Inside this container, we are going to directly use our cart list component. And let's give our title. And for the right side, again, I'm going to create 2 containers. The first one will be user cart container. And the second one will be the chart container. User cart, info, and batch. Okay, this is our main structure. If I shrink my page, you are going to see that we have just 1 column, but after the big screen, it's going to be 2 columns. Okay, awesome. So let's take care of our badges. Basically, we are going to show some icons, but I want to do something different here. When I hover over them, we are going to show an information. To do that, we are going to be using the hover cart component. Okay, it's here. As you can see, there's an element here, and when I hover over, it shows this cart. Let's use it. I'm gonna copy, open my terminal and install. And after that, we are gonna use it with the trigger component and the content component. As you realize, each component is really similar. We have the trigger and content. So when you create a couple of projects, everything is much easier to remember. So let's copy this. I will come back. Of course, I can write here a title. Let's say user badges. I'm going to give my class name, font semi-bold. And after, I'm going to create my list container, flags, gap between each item, and margin top. And let's create our first item. I'll close this terminal and let's import them. That comes from Components UI and Hover Cart. Let's do the same thing for the others. Just like that. But instead of this text, we are going to show an icon. So I'll say batch check from our icon component. I'm going to give a size just like that. And if you want to, let's add a background and a border. So I'll say class name. Firstly, I'll say rounded full. The background will be blue 500, but I'm going to reduce the opacity. Let's give a border. And again, I'm going to be using the same color. But this time it's going to be 50. Let's give a padding and see. Okay, awesome. And when we hover over, we are going to write a title and a description. So let's remove this. And I will say h1 tag, verified user. I'm going to change the style. Font will be bold and margin bottom. And here I'm going to create a p tag. This user has been verified by the admin. And again, let's change our class. Text muted foreground. Okay. So I'm going to create a couple more, but if you want to, let me just copy and paste. There is nothing different. I'm just going to change the icon here, this text, and this description, and this background. So instead of wasting your time, let me just copy and paste. I will import the icons. Okay. The title and description is different. And this is how we use hover cards. And what about this information? Again, I'm going to add a title first. Let's get exactly the same style. And I will say user information. And after that, I'm going to create a container. And for each user information, I'm going to give a space. So I will say space Y, for and margin top. And our first item will be a progress bar. Basically, we are going to add here a bar, and its title will be profile completion. So I will say flex column. The gap between the progress bar and the title will be 2. And I will say margin bottom. Let's add a p tag first. Profile completion. I'm going to change its color. Again, it's going to be gray. And right now we can add our progress bar. To do that, we are going to be using the progress component here. As you can see, there is a small animation when I refresh. It shows the progress. I'm going to install this. And after that, using this component, I'm going to show my progress. I will import from components UI and progress. And let's increase this value. And perfect. So let's write another item here. I'll say div. Let's create a span. Basically, it's going to be the key, and this is going to be the value. Let's give a style for this. And it's going to be font bold. Let's separate them. Flex, item center, and gap. Okay, let's create the others. Here is going to be email. Let's say the phone number. Maybe location. And the user role. And again, we can use here a badge. From components UI and badge. And I'll say admin. Let's remove this last one. That's enough, I think. It looks awesome. And right under the information, we can write the joining date. So I'm going to create a p tag. And I'll say joined on 2025. Let's give any number. I'm going to change the class name, text small, text muted, foreground, and margin top. Okay. But I want to show you one more thing here. I'm going to create here a button, and when I click on that button, we are going to show here a form that we can edit this user. It's one of my favorite components. Let's scroll down, and it's here, sheet. When I click, as you can see, it shows a model here that we can add anything. Like in this example, we are going to create a form, and we'll be able to edit the user. Let's install. I'm going to click, open terminal, paste. And as always, we are going to have the trigger and the content. When we click on this button, it's going to show our content. And inside this content, we can have a header, title, description. Let's do that. I'm going to copy here first and paste. Close my terminal. And right after our h1 tag, here, I'm going to create my trigger button. To do that, let's wrap them first. I'll say flags, item center, and justify between. So I'm going to separate our h1 tag and our button. Let's use our component here. And I'll say edit user. Of course, we can create a button. And if you do that, just remember to add here asChild. Okay, awesome. So when I click, as you can see, it shows our content here. But I think we shouldn't use all the form information in this component, in this page. So let's separate this. I will say edit user. I'll create my component. It's going to be a client component. And right now, I'm going to get all this content, cut, and paste it here. Right now, we can copy this, delete them, unused components, and paste them here. Let's remove this and this. Okay. Right now I can use my component here. Edit user. Okay, it's exactly the same. Nothing has changed. Our title will be edit user. I'll close this menu, and I want to give space between the title and the description. So I'll say margin bottom. And inside this description, we are going to create a form. So let's open the documentation and find the form component here. And as you'll notice, we can validate our form inputs using React Hook Form and Zod. So this validation feature comes out of the box. We don't have to install anything. And you'll see how easy to use it. As you can see, we are going to wrap our form with this wrapper, and we are going to add a form field. Let's see how to make the validation. But before, I'll install. Let's see if there is an advanced usage or not. Okay, it's here. Firstly, we are going to create our form schema. We are going to add here all the user information. Let's copy this. Zod is one of the most popular validation libraries. Basically, we can add here the type of the input, like string, boolean, number. We can add here the limitations. The minimum character is 2 and the maximum is 50. We can also add here the error messages, like if it's less than 2, write here a message, and your custom message, like username must be at least 2 characters. This is how it works. Let's create the others. Remember, we have the user information here, so we can use the email, phone, location, and role. So I will say email. It's gonna be a string, and its type will be email. If it's wrong, we can write a message, invalid email. I will create a phone. Again, string, let's say minimum 10, maximum 15. Of course, you can write your custom messages, but you already know how to do that. Let's say location. Again, string, and minimum 2. And finally, the user role. But we are going to have only 2 types of roles, the admin or a normal user. To do that, we can use enum and pass here our options, admin or user, no other option. Okay, right now we are going to be using React hook form. We are going to pass our validation and use them inside the description. Let's see how to do that. As you can see, we are going to be using this use form hook that comes from React hook form. And as a resolver, we are going to be using the Zod resolver, and we will pass our Zod validation. You can add some default values and use them inside the form. Let's copy this, and after we are going to add our form. I will import use form that comes from React hook form. And Zod resolver, let's also import this. Just like that. I'll say John Doe. I'm giving default values because remember, this is the user page and we already have the default values here. So when I click here, we are going to use all these values inside the form. Email, the phone number, location, and the role. Okay. So inside the description, I can create my form that comes from UI form. And I'm going to pass my form here. Get everything inside this form. Let's check the documentation actually. As you can see, we are passing our form. We'll create a form element. Of course, it's just a design. We are not going to submit that, but we can give this class name. So I'll say form space y, let's say 8. Space between each item will be 8. So I'm going to create my first form field. And I will say control form.control. And if I give my field name, which is username, it's going to automatically check the form here, find the default value and assign this here. And also it's going to automatically validate the field. because we are using exactly the same field name here. And after that, we are going to be using the render function. We are going to get the field. And right now we can create our input. So I'll say form item. Let's check the documentation. As you can see, form item, we can give any label. Inside the form control, we can create our form input. If you want to, you can give any description. Let's do that. Actually, I'm just going to copy here and import my components. Let's say this is your public username. I'm not going to give any placeholder because we already have the default values. Let's import this message. Basically, if there is any error, it's going to show the message. By the way, our component wasn't installed because I didn't answer this question. It's going to be no. Okay, I'll click. As you can see, the default value is here. And the best thing is it's auto-focused. So as soon as I click here, it's going to focus on the input. And if I write here a single character and submit, it's going to show our message here, the error message. Okay, let's do the same thing for the others. I'll copy this. This time it's going to be email. Let's change the description. Only admin can see your email. Another one. And let's say phone number. This is going to be the location. This is the public location. And finally, we are going to have the role. But remember, we have just two options. So instead of showing here an input, we can use the select component. Firstly, I'm going to change here. It's going to be role. But inside the form control, we are going to be using select. Let's change here. Only verified users can be admin. Okay. So let's see how to use select. I'll scroll down. It's here. We'll create our options here. We'll have two options and we can select them. Let's copy this. Install. I will import my components. Just like that. And inside the form control, I'm going to add my select component. We don't need any class name. The placeholder will be role and our options. Admin, its value, and user. Let's delete this. And perfect. Finally, we can add a button before this form. Let's create a submit button from our UI component. And let's say submit. Of course, we don't have any function yet. So it's going to refresh the page. But anyway, it looks pretty nice. There is something wrong. Let's see. Okay, we are using p tag inside the description. Is it here or? It's probably because of this description. To prevent this, I'm gonna write here asChild. And awesome. There is no problem. It's that easy, guys. So you don't have to create the edit user page or add new user page. Just create a button and show your form here. Okay. So right now, we can create our user information here. We'll just have the basic avatar, display name, and the user description. So I will come back, close this form. And here, I'll create a div that includes our avatar and the display name. Remember how we are using avatar. We are passing here the avatar image from components UI avatar. Pass here the source and the avatar fallback. John Doe. After that, let's create our display name using h1 tag. John Doe. Let's separate them. Flags, item center, and gap. I'm gonna change the avatar size. Size will be 12. And for this h1 tag, text will be X large, and the font will be semi-bold. Okay. Let's add here a description. After this div, I'll create a p tag and a random text here. I'll give a class name, text small, and the text color. Okay, we can give a space here, by the way. Space Y, let's say 2. Okay, awesome. And finally, let's add a chart here. Remember how we are using charts. Just come here and choose any chart you want. This time we can use something different. Okay, let's use multiple line chart. Firstly, I'm gonna get my data and config. Let's copy this. And let's create a component instead of writing this here. And I'll say app line chart component. Let's paste them. Import. Of course, it's gonna be use client. And let's use it here. Just like that. I'm gonna close my menu and I can add my chart. Firstly, let's add our title here, h1 tag, and user activity. Text X large and font semi-bold. And remember how we are using ShadCN charts. Firstly, we are calling here the chart container from UI chart. We are passing here our config. I can give any class name, let's say margin top, so we can separate this chart and our title. And inside, we are gonna add our line chart. Just like that. Let's actually copy it and after we are gonna discuss. Let's import them first. From Recharts, I'll close this terminal. We are doing here exactly the same thing. Only difference is the component name. Instead of area chart, we are using line chart. Instead of area or bar, we are using line. And of course, you can change the colors. We don't need HSL. We can directly use our chart colors. We are passing here our data keys in the chart data, desktop or mobile. Of course, it's not related to user, but anyway, as I said, it's just a design. And perfect. If you want to, you can add here the numbers. Remember how we are doing this. I'm going to add the y-axis. We don't need the data key. It's already the numbers. And we don't need this. Okay, awesome. It's really easy to add charts. Let's see the responsive design. Okay, perfect. If you want to, we can give sticky positioning for the navbar. So when we scroll down, it can stay here. So let's open the navbar component. And here, I'll say position sticky. The top position will be 0. I'm going to give my background. And the z index will be 10. So it's going to be over all the other elements. Just like that. Okay, perfect. So we finished our user page. Let's take care of the users page. Let's open the documentation and search for table. In this example, we have a table, and firstly, we are creating our table header, like invoice, status, and the others. Then we need to create the table body, and we are going to write each row one by one. It's really easy to use. It's just like HTML table, table header, the header row, body, and the body row. And this is great for basic data that doesn't require any advanced methods. But if you want to create tables with sorting, filtering, pagination, you'll need to use data table. And this component uses Tanstack table under the hood. This library allows you to create tables with advanced features like sorting, pagination, row selection. Of course, we'll not deep dive into Tanstack table because it's a ShadCN tutorial, but we'll be using some of its features. Okay, let's come back and install ShadCN table and Tanstack table. I'll open my terminal, install the table component, and Tanstack React table. After that, in our page folder, we are going to need two more files. The first one will be the columns, and the other one will be data table. We created here the users page, but in the example, it uses payments. Let's do the same thing. So I will come back, open my menu, close this terminal, and in the app router, I'm going to create my file, and it's going to be inside the payments page. I'll create my component, let's say payments page, and columns.tsx, and the data table.tsx. Okay. Of course, you can use everything inside the page file, but if you have a complex table, your page component will be really long. To prevent this, we are going to separate our components. Firstly, let's add here our data. In the example, we have some payments, but let's add here more items. I'm just going to copy my data and let's create a dummy fetching request. I'm going to paste it here. We are not going to be using any database, it's just a design. Instead, we are going to be using this dummy fetching data function. Basically, when we visit our page, we are going to call this fetching data function, and it's going to return this data. So let's use it here. I'll say const data, await, get data. Of course, it should be an async function. Okay, we are going to need our data type, but let's define this here because we are also going to need this here. So I will say export type and payment. We are going to have an ID. We are going to have an amount. It's going to be a number. We'll have the username, email, and the status. For the status, we are going to have 4 options: pending, processing, success, and failed. Okay, let's use it here. Import, we don't have any error anymore. Let's create here a div. And inside, I'm going to create my title. Let's say all payments. I'll give a style, margin bottom, some padding. I'm going to give a background color. And rounded will be MD. For the H1 tag, the font will be semi-bold. And now we can create our columns. Let's get back to the documentation. After creating our files, we are going to define our columns using column definition function. Let's import this from React table and define our columns just like that. The accessor key is the key inside our data, and the header is the title of the header. What I mean by that? Let's open second page and see our example. As you can see, for each columns, we have the headers. So let's create our columns. And also I added here the username. Let's also add this. I'll say username. You can give any header title you want. Let's say user. I'm gonna move this status here. And now we'll create a data table component. And using this component, we are gonna render our table. Basically, we are going to pass here our columns that we have just defined and our data array. And using useReactTable hook, we are going to generate a table. And finally, using this table and ShadCN table components, we are going to render our data table. So let's copy this and paste into our data table component. I will close this menu. And now in the payments page, we can use our data table. Let's open the page. After this div, I'll import my data table. And remember, we are going to need our columns and the data. So I'll say columns. That will come from the columns file. Because we are exporting this, We can use it on our payments page and our data. And of course, our data should be an array because we have multiple payment items inside. Okay, let's see. I'm gonna open my payments page. And it's here. Awesome. If you check the Tanstack table, you'll see tons of different features. Let's console log. I'll say table. Open my console. And as you can see, there are many methods here. To get headers, we are using getHeaders group. To get rows, we are using getRowModel function. We can use the pagination using these functions. We can use filtering, row selection, and all the other features. If you want me to create complete Tanstack table tutorial, just let me know in the comments, because for this tutorial, we are just gonna explore only some of its features. Okay, let's see what else we can do. As I said, Tanstack table is incredibly flexible. You can customize it as you want. And this example shows that we can change our headers and the table cells. Remember, this is the header and these are the cells, each column item here. So we can give a different style. And for this amount, we can modify the output. Remember, in our data, the amount is just a number, but we can take this amount and transform this into a currency, US dollars. And instead of sending the number, we can return this new version. Let's do that. I'm gonna get this header and the cell, and I'm gonna update my column. So instead of sending this simple text, we are going to return a div, and for each cell, we are going to return this number. I'm going to save, and right now, as you can see, there is a $sign here. So if you have the name column and the surname column, for example, instead of creating two different columns, you can join them together. You can get the name and the surname using getValue and return name plus surname. You can also just change the style. For example, for the status, I'll say cell, get the row, and let's get our value. I'll say status row.getValue and the name of the field, which is status. And right now we can return a div, pass here our status as string, and change the class name. For each status, we can give different class names, because remember, it can be pending, success, failed, or processing. And if you are using multiple conditions, it's better to use CN. Remember how we are using this. Firstly, I'm going to write here my base class name. Let's say give a padding, rounded will be MD, width will be maximum content, and the text will be, let's say, XML. And now I'm going to write my condition. If the status equals pending, the color will be yellow 500, but I'm gonna reduce the opacity. Let's write two more. If it's success, it's gonna be green. And if it's failed, it's gonna be red. And now we have a different style for each cell. Awesome. So this is how you can customize your columns. We can also add an action button for each row. Let's see the example first. As you can see, there is a button here. It uses a drop-down menu, and we can see the options here. Let's do that. Basically, I'm going to create one more column here. If you want to, you can add here any header, but in the example, as you can see, there is no header. And for each cell, we are going to return this drop-down menu. And here, we are using row original. It basically returns all the row data like ID, status, email, username, and amount. And using this data, we can show different options. Like we can copy its ID, we can see the customer, we can add a delete, update buttons, or whatever it might be. I'm just gonna copy this because you already know how to create drop-down menu. Let's don't waste time and copy this. And create our column here. Let's import them quickly. From components, UI, and dropdown, we have a button here. Okay, let's see. And it's here. Of course, it should be at the end. So I'm gonna cut my column and paste it here. Okay, it's much better. So this is how we are adding action buttons. What about the pagination? To add this feature, we are just gonna import getPagination row model from Tanstack table and use it inside the useReact table hook. We are just gonna call our function here. Let's do that. I'll open my data table, paste it here, and import my function. And after that, we can create our buttons after the table. For now, we'll have two buttons, the previous button and the next button. When we click this button, it's gonna show the next page. When we click here, it's gonna show the previous page. And if there is no data for the previous page or the next page, they are gonna be disabled. So let's copy this. And after the table, I'm gonna create my buttons. Let's import. And perfect. By default, it's gonna show only 10 items. If I click here, I can see the second page, third page, and the last one. And right now, it's disabled. Okay. It's that easy. But if you want to add a more advanced pagination, you can create reusable components. Basically, we are going to create a new component. So you can go to the last page, the first page. You can add a select that users can choose how many items do they want to see per page. Let's create. I will open my menu, and inside the components, I will create table pagination. Paste my code and add this component into my data table. So instead of this basic pagination, I will comment this out, and I'm going to call my component data table pagination. As you can see, components and the table pagination component. And we are going to pass here our table. And now we can see the next page There is also the first page option and the last page option. And we can see more items per page. Okay. We can also sort our columns. Let's see the example first. As you can see, we can sort the email column. To do that, we are going to need a state that we can keep the sorting. As you can see, we are going to create a use state hook. And after, we are going to pass our state inside this state object. And we are going to be using onSortingChange method to set our state here. Of course, to make this work, we are going to need getSortedRow model from Tanstack table. Let's do that. I'm going to copy this state, close this menu, open my data table. Let's directly call useState from React, sorting state from Tanstack React table, and I'm going to pass here the state object and my state, which is sorting. And on sorting change, we are going to update our state. And we are going to call getSortingRow model. Okay, let me show you what we are importing again. By the way, we don't need the button anymore. We have changed our pagination. And right now, we are going to change our column. If you remember, for the email, we are just returning a basic text here. But this time, we are going to create a button. And when we click this button, it's going to toggle the sorting. If here is true, it's going to force the descending sort. If it's not, it's going to force the ascending sort. We also add here an icon. So let's add this instead of this string and import this icon. And now, as you can see, we have a button here, and when I click, it's gonna sort our items. Okay, what else we can do? We can add a row selection. Basically, we'll add here one more column and add a checkbox component for each row, so we can select our rows. To do that, again, we are gonna modify our data table. In this component, I'm going to add one more state, and we'll store the selected row. Let's say row selection, set row selection. Let's remove this type, and I'm going to pass my state here. When we change the selection, we are going to update our state on row selection change, set row selection. And let's create a column. At the very beginning, I'm going to create a new column. The ID will be select. And we are going to have the header and the cell. We'll take the row. And we are going to create a checkbox. Remember how we are using this? From our UI component, and I will do the same thing for the header, because we are also going to need a checkbox here. Remember how we are using header? We can get the table, and we can return anything we want. And again, it's going to be a checkbox. Just like that. And right now, when we select any row, we are going to update our state. To do that, I'll say onCheckedChange, we are going to get the value. We'll be using the row and the toggle selected function. So if it's true, it's going to be false. If it's false, it's going to be true. And also we should pass here the checked To do that, again, we are going to check the row and get is selected function. And what about here? For the header, if I select this checkbox, we should select all these rows. So again, we are going to be using onCheckChange method, but this time we'll be using the table and toggle all page rows selected. Just like that. And I will say checked. And we will check if all the rows selected or not. Table get is all page rows selected, or table get is some page rows selected, and indeterminate. So what does this mean? Let's open the example again. Here, if I select my header, as you can see, it's checked. But even if I check one of these rows, as you can see, it's still checked, but the background is not changing. That means not all the rows are selected, but just some of them. Okay, let's try. I'm gonna save. And perfect. And we can see the number of the selected rows. Okay, awesome. As I said, there are many other React table features, but it's a ShadCN tutorial, so I think we spent enough time with the data table. You know how to implement the most common table features. And that's all, I think. We finished our project. You learned the ShadCN basics, components, variants, theming, using components together by combining them, tables, forms, dark mode, and now you are ready to design your own project from scratch. I hope it was helpful. If you learned something new today, please like the video and leave a comment. Don't forget to follow Lama Dev's social media accounts. I hope I'll see you in the next tutorial. Goodbye.